Uh, Hi. Today I'm going to discuss about the triple A concept of NetIQ Access Manager. Triple A stand for authentication, authorization, and access. So how you can authenticate a user, then authorize that user, and then give, based on the authorization, give him access to one of the protected resource. As you know that authentication is something is taken care by the identity provider. Identity provider only provides authentication. Authorization is provided by access gateway. So once authentication is completed and you come back to the access gateway, authorization is applied. Access gateway checks whether you are authorized to access a protected resource or not. To learn this concept with respect to NetIQ Access Manager, we will take one example, and in that example, what we do, we will create a new user, and this new user will authenticate at identity provider. After authentication, identity provider will provide a role to this user. Access gateway will use this role to identify whether this user is authorized or not. So for to take this use case, we have to first create a role policy. Role policy in NAM is a policy which we create so that after authentication that role will be applied to the user. Now this role can be anything in an organization. A user or employee role can be first as an employee. The employee can be a manager. Employee can be a sales employee, a finance employee, or marketing employee. So these are the different kind of role you can assign to a user during authentication process. So the the, the identity server is responsible for providing the role to the authenticated user. If you don't create any role policy in identity provider, by default identity provider provides a role called authenticated to the user once it authenticates. So the first thing we will do, we will create a user. To create a user in NAM, you can use, you can see this role and task. If you go to left hand side, multiple options are there. There is an option called user. Go to user and then create user. Creating the user, you have to give a username. I will give session underscore user1. Last name, let's give it session. Context is something which will tell you where this user is going to be stored. So we will give context as novel, the same as admin user. We store admin under novel. So in this user will also be created under novel. Password, let's give some password to this user, and only this star marks are the mandatory parameter. So we'll do okay, and the user is created. Whether a user is actually created or not, for that you can go to rename user and type username session underscore user1 and check. Oops. sorry, to check this user, you have to go to modify user, and here you give the username session underscore user1. You can see it says that the object name entered could not be found in the context specified because we have not given any context, and eDirectory doesn't know where to search this user. So as we have stored the user under novel, we will give a session underscore user1 dot novel. Okay, now you can see the user is here. So we have created a user. Now the second thing is we will create a role policy. Creating a role policy, go to identity server, edit, go to roles, manage policy, and here you can create a role like session user policy name, and you have to select the identity server role. These are the different type of policy we will select. So here you can see the 3 policies are for access gateway and 2 policies are for identity server. We'll use this. Okay, so in a policy, identity server role policy, you can see there is a condition group and there is an action. This condition, based on this condition, it will be decided that what action need to be taken. So if you see the condition, there are multiple conditions here. Authenticating IDP, it checks which IDP the user is authenticating, and then authentication contract, that what contract has been used. There are multiple here. Right now we will take the session user, and we'll create a policy like that. If the session underscore user1 comes and authenticate with identity server, give him a role of session user. So for that, go to credential profile, and in this credential profile I will use the LDAP username, and these are the different field. If you select data entry field, you can give a string. Our username is session underscore user1. This condition we have created, if the LDAP username is session underscore user1, string equals, then action. So in this there are 2 kind of actions: activate role, activate selected role. We will go with the activate role and give a role as small session user. Okay. When you create any role policy, you need not to, it will not ask you to update server, either access gateway or on the identity server, because this information is right now with the admin console configuration store. So now we have created a policy, role policy. So whenever user session underscore user1 will authenticate, he will get a role like session user. Now we will use this role session user to authorize the user after authentication at access gateway. So for this, you have to go to access gateway, edit, we will select the reverse proxy, session proxy 1. Here we will select the proxy service, session proxy service 1, and we'll go to protected resource field, and here we will use the same resource, that /session/info.php authorization We'll go to the, we have to create an authorization policy. We'll go to authorization section, click none, manage policy. It will, here you have to create authorization policy, click new. Access gateway authorization is already selected, just give a name, session user. Okay, policy by this name already exists, enter a unique name. Okay, so we have given the role policy the same name. Here we will give authorization. Okay, this policy is also similar. It has a condition group and it has a action. We'll create the condition group as we are looking for the role which is provided by the identity provider. We will go to roles, and here this current role will tell you what the current role is assigned to this user, and here we will make the value to a data entry field so that we can give our value what we want to give. Session user, this is the role is assigned. I have given this, and in action you have multiple action. One action is permit. So if the user is session user, permit him to access the resource. If he is a session user, deny the access. If he is a session user, redirect it to some other URL or re-authenticate with contract. For the first, we will take deny. So in this case, what will happen when we'll authenticate with the username session underscore user1, identity provider will give a role session user to the user, and access gateway will check whether the user has a role session user, and it will be rejected because we have configured deny. Okay, and then we have to update the access gateway because we have created one policy. Okay, so here you can see that it's not asking for update. So in that case, you have to go again and protected resource. Here see authorization policy is still nothing. If we go here, you can see there is an authorization policy, but that is not enabled. So make sure you are enabling this. Okay, so now this is enabled. If you do OK, you can see authorization policy is assigned. If you go back to access gateway, you can see it is looking for the update. Okay, fresh, get to pending and current. Here, if you check identity server, it is also green. Well, now what we have done, we have created a new user. We have created a role policy for identity server, and if that user session underscore user1 will authenticate with the IDP should assign the role of session user, and this role will be used by access gateway to provide authorization. So let's see how this is accomplished. We'll access that our protected resource session info.php. It will be redirected to IDP for authentication. Okay, so we are now at IDP. We have to give this username which we have created for this session underscore user1, password novel, login. You can see the user is able to access this. It means somehow the authorization policy, either authorization policy is not applied, or even if role policy is not applied, or even if the role policy is applied, authorization policy has been failed. Let's check what mistake we have done. Let's go to the IDP role and session underscore user. Right, now here you can see we have created the role policy, but we have not enabled it. If we will not enable, what is happening, as I said, that if you will not assign any role policy with the identity server, it will give a by default role as authenticated. So as nothing is enabled here, identity provider has given a role called authenticated to the user session underscore user 1, and it went there for the access gateway, and authorization policy is checked against the role authenticated, and the condition did not work, so it has allowed access to the protected resource. Here now we will enable it. Okay, again we will access the protected resource once again. For this I need a fresh browser so that it will go for the authentication. I will access the protected resource again. Access denied to this resource. So here you can see that uh, when we enable the role policy on identity provider, after authentication, that policy, during authentication, that policy is applied, and it checked if the user is session underscore user, give him a role called session user. Once you are authenticated at IDP, you comes back to AG, and at AG authorization policy is checked, and authorization policy says that if the role policy session user denied that resource. Okay, so to verify this again, we will use the admin user and see what happens. Admin and oh, here. Now you can see here the difference. Uh, when identity provider is applying the role policy, it is checking for the user session underscore user. Now right now we have authenticated with user admin, so in this case the role assigned to admin user is only role authenticated. Session user role is not applied, so when it is checked at the access gateway, the condition fails and it gives you access to the protected resource. There is no action which is going to be applied. By default action, if condition fails, you give the access. So this is one of the example, and you can go and change different parameters in the authorization policy. You can change this thing, or you can change the action. You can give an action called permit. You can use redirect where you want if this condition is applied and you want to redirect the user to some other website, you can use that. So this I am leaving to you guys to practice this thing. uh, when you are creating authorization policy, you can see here you have created authorization policy and it says that it is used by session underscore AG, which is a reverse proxy. Here gives you the reverse proxy name. It means this particular authorization policy is assigned to that. You can practice with changing this authorization policies. You can create new condition group and you can use the different actions. We will have a separate session that is completely to the policies, where we will see what are the different, what do you mean by condition group and condition structure and different things. So in the next session I will talk about identity injection and why identity injection is used, and we'll take an example for that. So here in the again the summary of this session is a user is authenticated and it gets a role using role policy, and then we can check the authorization using authorization policy at access gateway. So this follows the concept of triple A in NAM. The triple A stands for authentication, authorization and access. You authenticate the user first, which is responsibility of the IDP, then you authorize the user and give access to the user, which is the uh, which comes under access gateway. So access gateway checks for the authorization first, and if authorization is successful, then it provide access to the protected resource. Thanks.